You are listening to How to Get Over Your Ex, episode number 232, Getting Over an Ex Who Betrayed You. Welcome to How to Get Over Your Ex, a podcast on getting over your ex without it just taking time. I'm your host, Breakup Coach Dorothy. Let's turn your pain into power and your heartbreak into happy. Hello, beautiful Bravehearts. How is everyone doing? I have a very interesting guest today, you guys. I am really excited about this conversation. And the intro today is going to be a little bit longer than normal because of the wild connection that I have with Luke. So we have Luke here today. He is a coach who helps people going through betrayal. And I'm going to do a long intro, Luke. So I'm going to give you
No, that's
space.
absolutely fine.
Okay. I'm going to give you space to talk and tell your story. I'm so excited. But I just think I want all of my brave hearts to hear this because I don't even know how to say this. I don't actually think I've ever told you this, Luke. So I'm like very excited to see your reaction. So Luke is a coach. We got coached through the same coach certification, life coach school. And every year they do a mastermind. And so I think it was last year that they had this mastermind. And he's from the UK. He flies over to the United States. We're all at this mastermind. And to be clear, this specific mastermind, I was feeling like a little under the weather. And because I was under the weather when I was on this airplane coming down, my ears didn't pop. I couldn't really hear people. I hated like having interaction with people. I don't know if I should have even gone to that mastermind. I was like just not feeling it. I was really hiding and like dodging people, and I just wanted to be there, get the content, and then like I peacefully left. I think I actually booked an earlier flight home. So anyways, I get this DM. Let's be clear too. Sometimes in Instagram, the DMs don't go. I don't know if you have this problem, Luke, but they don't go to your main email. They go to like a
Yep.
second like message system.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah.
So sometimes I get a lot of messages all at once. And so like after mastermind, that's one of the things where I just kind of feel like there's a lot of people reaching out and doing stuff. And then secondly, that message had fallen into the ether of the messages that I don't look at because they're like sales emails typically, like someone selling me something about how to get more clients. And so long story short, like a couple weeks go by and my friend Elsie takes a screenshot and sends me this screenshot of this man who has tagged me on Facebook and asking people like where I am and how to get a hold of me. And it's like, what is happening right now? And you know what's funny is like when I first saw this, I was like, who is this person? And the only reason I like took a moment to like think about responding back to you is because you were a coach and some other coaches had like said something. But oftentimes, I mean, I get so many requests about people, like people will reach out and be like, hey, I just need to tell you my story. It's like so different from anything that you've heard. And trust me, like I want to hear everyone's story. I genuinely do. I just don't have enough time in the day, like to just sit down and have coffee with someone for 20 minutes to an hour. Like I wish I could, but I can't. So, anyways, he tags me in this thing. Elsie sends me a screenshot. She texts it to me. And I'm like, okay, let me give this a beat for a second. I'll reach out to him and see what's going on. And then you're like, can we get on a Zoom? And I'm like, oh my God, Luke, why do we have to get on a Zoom for this? Like, just voice note me what's going on. And so then finally we get on this Zoom, we get on a 20-minute Zoom and I'm like, I'm here to help coaches. Like I genuinely like, I want other coaches to succeed. I also love having conversations with the coaches who are in my field because a lot of times I feel like we're interacting with other coaches who are selling coaching to coaches or like doing business coaching. Whereas I think what we do is like a lot different. And I love talking about that. And I love, I mean, just everything about like our heartbreak kind of industry, right? So I'm like, okay, cool. If he is working on something that's so similar, but also so different, like I do want to have a conversation with him about this. And I saw someone say, like, oh my God, I've been waiting for you two to do a collab in so long. So I'm like, that's intriguing. So we get on this call, you guys. we get on this call, we get on this Zoom. I'm meeting with this random man I never met. And he is telling me his breakup story and his heartbreak story. And I'm like, pretty standard. Yep. Hearing it. Yep. But then you give me the whammy of all whammies. And you're like, and my wife that I went through all of this with was your student, was your client. And instantly I'm like, oh my God, this is a full circle moment. This is insane, right? Because then I start putting all of these pieces together of like, I know the stories you were talking about because I was hearing them from the other side. And so, well, hearing some of those other stories from the other side. And so instantly, again, I didn't tell you this yet, Luke, but I'm just like giving you my play-by-play on my end because I think it's hilarious. So then instantly I'm like, oh my God, I feel so loyal. Like you guys, I'm a Taurus. I am loyal through and through. So like my clients are like my besties. Some of them, like, it just like, I feel like they are like, I just have this bond with them. So as soon as you told me that your wife was who she was, I was like, I love her. And I'm like, I hope she knows you're talking to me right now. And I instantly went into like block mode where I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. I'm like, do I need to reach out to her? Like, but because you guys were on good terms and you are where you are now and you're telling me all of this, I'm like, okay, it's probably fine. Everything's chill. It's fine. Calm down. But I was like instantly like almost just like loyal to a fault or like, um, I don't know. It was just so interesting. I haven't had that happen in my career yet. I have had other weird, interesting things happen with exes reaching out and like things like that, but I hadn't had that yet. And I was just like, this is hilarious and amazing. And I remember getting off the phone and calling my friend Danica and being like, girl, listen to this. Isn't this wild? Like my clients, now husband, well, I don't know if you guys are married yet or not, but
We're not married at the minute,
not
no.
married. Okay. So, but anyways, my client's ex-husband, now that they're dating, is now a coach. This is just such a wild moment, right? So crazy. So, long story short, you guys, I tell you all that backstory because all of you know, I don't just like bring people on the podcast to bring people on the podcast. They have to like have a true meaning, a true message. I have to agree with their message. I very much like vet these individuals. And typically most of you know, if you've been on the podcast for a while, you know that a lot of the interviews or the people I bring on are sharing their stories, having gone through the Get Over Your Ex program. And so if I bring someone else on, it's typically like an expert, a leading expert in their area, or someone who I think has like a very unique um, perspective that I feel like is so profound. And so I do believe that Luke has that, but then I also just love like the extra dynamic of you dated a Braveheart or you were going through a breakup with a Braveheart who was also in the Get Over Your Ex program. So that whole thing was just so cool to me. That's how I met Luke. So Luke, do you want to do your introduction and tell everyone
Yes,
who you are, where you're from? Tell us the whole story about what happened between you and your ex-wife. And yeah, get us up to
sure.
date.
Well, firstly, Dorothy, thank you so much for having me on. And I feel very honored, especially having heard everything that you said just now. Extremely grateful. And hopefully I can offer some value as much as I can offer an interesting story. So yes, you're absolutely right. I was happily married. We'd been married for about 8 years. We've got two young children. And my wife ended up having an affair with actually a close friend of mine, lived very close by. And so it was a very uncomfortable situation, as I'm sure you can imagine. Long story short, we ended up separating and then divorcing. And we focused very heavily on co-parenting, really making sure that that part of our relationship was consistent because the kids played such an important role to both of us. She remained in a relationship with the affair partner for the best part of a year, I forget exactly. And then that came to an end. And I'd been through I'd been working through the process myself of just trying to sort of grieve the marriage, to grieve the loss of identity, the change of who I was as a person. I found myself in a very different set of circumstances. I didn't live in the family home. There's all of these things that changed. But it also laid out this blank canvas in terms of what I could do with my life. So I was trying to sort of figure my life out in a lot of different ways. they split up and we still actively were co-parenting. So occasionally we would maybe take the kids out for, a day out to a farm park or some play park or something like that. And there was one particular occasion where we'd been out somewhere and we'd stopped for dinner on the way home. And we were just chatting away, again, just casually as sort of friends and co-parents, nothing more at the time. And she gets this napkin and this serviette, and she grabs a pen and she goes, "Oh, I need to show you something. I need to show you something." Anyway, she starts scribbling this thing down on the back of the of this napkin, and it starts with circumstance, thoughts, feelings, and she starts listing out the self-coaching model, which of course, I mean, I've always been fascinated by human psychology and why people do the things they do. And although I'd never really sort of pursued a professional career in it up until that point in my life, it was always something that I was really, really focused. I love people, I love understanding people and everything about them. I'm very introspective naturally. So she started teaching me the self-coaching model. And of course, unbeknown to me, after she had parted with the affair partner, well, of course, she'd found that very challenging. Plus, she'd gone straight from our marriage to that relationship. So she was in a position where, I mean, I don't really want to speak too much for her, but in a position where she hadn't really processed the loss of probably either relationship to some extent. And it turns out she had gone through or was near the end of the Get Over Your Ex program, which was fascinating. And of course, then this exposed me to the self-coaching model. I started listening to the Life Coach School podcast, and arguably the rest is history. But I found this love, this desire for everything just connected and fitted really well in terms of understanding myself on a new level, but also in terms of being able to sort of validate much of the natural process that I'd taken through healing and a combination of things, which was really, really just, well, I loved every minute of it. And I decided that I wanted to become a coach and take that route, and that's what I did. So I went through the training and actually initially set up as a co-parent coach because I thought that would be the area I was most interested in. I thought that was the area I could help, and but I realized that there was this deeper call for something more. The pain that I knew I'd experienced going through betrayal and seeing it in other people, many conversations that I'd had in the interim time. I really wanted to sort of really shift and focus on that. But I was quite nervous to do so to begin with, because when you start a business, particularly in this kind of world, it's a lot of online presence. And I didn't want to be sort of dragging my ex-wife through, the social media experience, if you like, in terms of like friends and family liking and sharing all the stuff. And it just felt too personal. But we'd had a conversation and basically agreed that, under certain conditions, then this was something that I wanted to pursue personally, and she was very supportive of. And it was probably around this sort of time as well that we'd probably been apart for a couple of years. And like I said, we got on really well and we just reconnected. And then it was a case of like, well, what if we just went on a date? What would that look like? So we did. And then we basically just kept us sort of, I suppose, like a secret relationship for a few months while we tested things out to try and figure out if this was actually something that we really wanted, because something that was important to both of us, that we weren't just doing it because it was the easiest thing. We weren't just doing it for the kids. We weren't doing it for money or logistics or any of those other things. It really wanted to be because we both wanted to. And of course, we'd both gone through our separate journeys, mine through my coaching direction and my own healing journey, and hers through, as it turns out, the Get Over Your Ex program, plus some other stuff herself. And so we were coming back together as very different people. And that's exactly what we did. And we've been back together now for a couple of years. And the dynamic's very different. We don't live together, but it's amazing on so many levels. And when, of course, I'd been through certification and, I knew of you, Dorothy. I knew you existed, of course. And the idea to connect was amazing. Then I saw the opportunity in Dallas, and I was asking lots of people while I was there. I was like, has anyone seen Dorothy Johnson? Has anyone seen her anywhere? I was looking around a lot of the time because if I'd seen you, that's it, I'd have been straight at you. And then, of course, I got back to the UK, and like you say, I sent a couple of messages, but they obviously got lost in the digital cyberspace, which I completely understand. And I thought, no, I need to have this conversation. So I reached out wherever I could. I just shouted, and you heard.
I'm so glad you did. I'm so glad you did. Like, So everyone, he came into the Get Over Your Ex program and did a whole workshop on betrayal. Like, I'm just so excited that you're doing this. I think it's so important. And you have a unique perspective on many fronts. One of the things that's talked about inside of the Get Over Your Ex community a lot is, and that I think that I bring up a lot more often than other breakup or divorce or heartbreak coaches, is this whole idea of getting back together with your ex. It's a real thing. And I think there's a lot of stigma around not getting back together with your ex. And I mean, just look at, I love how you walked us through that entire journey. Thank you so much, because you can see like each of you did individualized healing in a lot of ways, and under the right circumstances, it works. And like, I don't think that you're the same person. I don't think she's the same person. It's a completely new relationship. And then from the Get Over Your Ex standpoint, I mean, I obviously don't know all the work that you did, but from her side, it's like completely unattached. And I
Yes.
think that is the beauty of it. And it can create such a cohesive, healthy, organic, natural relationship, and so much room for like the humanness that we are, which I love. So we don't need to spend too much time talking about that, but I'm very excited about you being here. Thank you so much for taking the time to come onto the podcast. I mean, you experienced multiple betrayals. So as you were kind of going through that story, I really noticed like, oh my God, you didn't just experience the betrayal of your wife, which is a whole bucket of things, right? But you also experienced the betrayal of your best friend, like a very close friend. So it's betrayals from multiple sides, and that just had to feel extremely jarring. Can you just start there with like, what was your emotional experience of that?
It was confusing.
Yeah.
And I think to begin with, I was able to, there was a lot of anger and frustration. And but it was different towards both of them.
Mhm.
From my wife's perspective, there was more understanding and actually compassion from my side. It's like I recognized the circumstances and the situation and the little changes that happened over a period of time that felt like I was just losing control of, and I couldn't do anything to grasp back. It sort of felt like she'd already checked out and there was nothing I could do. I felt kind of helpless in the situation. Um, but I also kind of understood as well. I mean, I think I was a pretty good husband, all things considered. But she'd obviously, there was something missing for her at that time. But for him, he didn't really have anything to lose, which is why I found it so selfish in a lot of ways. Because obviously for her, there was a big gamble. It was a big challenge. It was risk of breaking up the marriage, the damage of the kids, the family, the connections, all the things, Whereas he was this sort of standalone person. Okay, yes, there was the friendship, of course, and it it, it really it really hurt that the value on that friendship was, well, clearly not where I thought it was. I mean, I wouldn't say that we were best friends, but we were certainly good friends. And of course, we lived very close by and spent a lot of time together. And he was, regular around the house. He knew the kids and all the things. So it really did feel, very, very, very painful. And there was, because of the physical location, the temptation to want to go and do harm, or at least to go and react in some way was extremely high, because the temptation was like being dangled like a carrot in front of me all the time. But the kids probably were the primary reason that I was able to maintain my composure and not react in that moment. And quite interestingly, because of the physical location, he actually still lives where he lived at the time. I actually see him. We're not friends, we don't speak anymore, but I see him quite regularly. And what has happened for me, it's become a really good reference point about from how I feel regards the situation on the whole. And I actually noticed quite quickly as I started really working on myself and taking responsibility for myself and really understanding both the part I played and also how I was responsible for my own feelings and my own thinking and my own interpretation of the situation, that I could use him as this reference point to look back and say, wow, I it wasn't that long ago, and I would have quite happily, been driving down the road and run him over, sort of thing. And whereas now it's like there's just nothing. It's just another. The worst thing about it is that, normally I'd walk down the street and I would always say hi or good morning to anybody that I walk past, and if we happen to cross paths, then that doesn't happen. But really, that's the only long-lasting consequence.
That's amazing. That's so wild to think about. One thing you brought up too was like the co-parenting and how you were going to be a co-parenting coach. That's also extremely needed. But do you think working through betrayal also makes you a better parent?
Yes. So
Right?
I would say that the main thing for me was realizing. So to begin with, all the focus was on the kids. Like that was my everyone was telling me all the noise from the outside was like we just focus on the kids. They're your driving force. That's what's going to get you through this. And maybe right at the beginning, maybe that was true. But actually, quite interestingly, when I first moved out of the family home and the kids came to stay with me for the first time, I actually felt quite a lot of resentment. And I felt pretty awful for that as well, because really what it meant to me was that they were the reason I couldn't have that clean cut. I couldn't just disappear off to another country, delete all the Facebook profiles, delete all the pictures, and just burn everything that of existence. I couldn't do that. I couldn't have what I felt like I needed as closure. I'm glad that I didn't have that opportunity now, but at the time, that's not how I felt. So to begin with, I did spend a lot of time really trying to focus on the kids, but it wasn't that long before I realized that if I put myself at the top of the pile and really focused on who I was and how I wanted to show up, the kids got the best version of me anyway. And of course, doing that and not holding other people responsible for how I felt, in particular, my partner, my ex-wife, or now co-parent, I just approached the whole situation completely differently. It was really coming from a very different place. It removed the need for that tug of war that you get between parents after they're separated. And bearing in mind that at the time she was still in a relationship with the other guy. So it's there was obviously that was difficult for me because he was becoming more and more integrated with the children. But still really focused on being the best version I could possibly be of myself, and just knew that by doing that, everyone would get the best version of me. So that's why it was so important to focus on that co-parenting relationship. And as it happened, that also laid a really solid foundation for getting over the betrayal itself and putting myself in a position a couple of years down the line where we could actually reconnect.
Yeah, I love that so much. I think that's very powerful. Thank you so much for being so transparent about your experience. I know so many people listening are just going to be like, yes, that was everything. He just summed it up so well. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about just betrayal in general. Can you tell us a little bit about what is like the biggest misconception around betrayal?
There's many, of course.
Mhm.
One in particular that I think does not help is there's a belief when people are betrayed that they want and need to know all the details, like every last detail, so that they can understand. And it's that ever searching quest for understanding to try and figure out why it is the partner has done what they've done. And that's emphasized because the person that has betrayed them, they believe that they've done it to hurt them. It's like my partner, my wife, has had an affair to hurt me. It's like, well, how could she do that? Surely she knew what that would do to me. But that's really not true at all. It actually had nothing to do with me. It almost has nothing ever to do with the betrayed person. In fact, the only occasions where I see that it does is revenge cheating, ironically, which ends up being the betrayed person that does it anyway. So I think disclosing all the information too soon, and particularly like excessively every detail, can be really damaging to the healing process. When we're in that state of shock and disbelief and it just becomes completely overwhelming, we're quite dysregulated emotionally as it is. It's already a very difficult time to go through. We've already experienced this major shock. So when we layer on all of these intricate details, well, for one thing, every time you ask a question, you'll try and seek the answer to a question. You might get an answer, but all it does is create 10 more questions. So it ends up being like a path that you can never, ever complete. And you become completely overwhelmed. And then actually it puts you into such an emotional, dysregulated state that it's very, very difficult to move forward. And you end up being completely trapped. And often when people come to me for the first time, that's often the state that they're in. They've really like compressed themselves into this position where they can't focus on anything. Their thoughts are flying around their head. They've got lots of intrusive thoughts. They're not sleeping properly, all of these things. So it's really gaining some clarity at that moment to try and unpick those things and simplify it to move forward.
I agree so wholeheartedly. I feel like one of the things that we talk about so much is about how these questions never give you an answer. And even when you get the answer, you don't accept the answer. Like you'll hear exactly why they did it. And then you're like, but no, but really, why did you do it?
Exactly. Because
Right?
you always want to make it mean something about you.
Yeah, exactly. And so actually, I love that you brought that part up too. I just did a 5 day training. It was awesome. And within that 5 day training, day one, I literally teach them the model. Day two, we talk about feelings, but I did a recap on day two about day one because they submit homework, they show me their homework, and it's the same thing is happening in so many of our minds when we're going through a breakup or betrayal. And I drew this stick figure. My drawing skills are not there, but I drew these two stick figures. And you can, when you learn the model, right, you learn that thoughts create feelings, feelings fuel action. And so I drew like let's just say Ed is his name, the stick figure. I drew the thought bubble and it's like, I'm not sure what I want in my life. And so then it's making Ed feel uncertain or insecure. And so then from that place, he says his action is to say to his wife or girlfriend, I don't want to do this anymore. And then stick figure Sally, she takes that, the verbiage from his mouth, and then she's got her own little thought bubble. And her thought bubble says, I'm not enough. I wasn't worth fighting for. He didn't choose me. Right. And we've made it mean that about ourselves. And then that leads us to feeling unloved. And when we feel unloved, we cry and we perpetuate the cycle. So it's just so good to see like a visual representation of that. Maybe I'll drop that, you guys, anyone who's listening, I'll drop a link for you guys to like look at that because we took a picture of it and shared it in the group. But it's so good to see that as like a visual representation of what's actually happening and showing you it really has nothing to do with you. Like it wasn't like Ed, stick figure Ed was saying, "Oh my gosh, I don't like love her anymore," or "I want to hurt her." It's like, I don't know what I want in my life anymore, and I'm feeling unfulfilled, or I'm feeling not desired, or I'm not feeling unloved. Now, that doesn't like make cheating okay or something that we agree with, but we can at least understand this person had thoughts that led to feelings that led to the action of betrayal in some form or of breaking up with me. And now, what can I control? I can control my side of the street, which are my thoughts, my feelings, and my actions from that.
Exactly. Exactly.
So
Yeah,
fun.
it is so fun. And it's interesting we're talking about this stuff and I'm smiling the whole time because recognizing this stuff has such an impact on your life in every
Right.
area. I mean, we're talking about these big things like betrayal, like getting over your ex, like dealing with these difficult situations. But this applies to the very simplest of everyday actions, you know, communication with your work colleague, your relationship with your children, how you relate to a bill that comes through the post, everything, it all works. Just do it.
So good. Okay. So then tell me, we talked about, one of the biggest obstacles is are the never-ending questions, but is there anything else that comes to mind when you think about like really big obstacles when it comes to betrayal?
Trust. I mean, trust always comes to the top of the pile when we talk about betrayal in general. And trust falls into two distinct categories. We've got there's trusting yourself and there's trusting others. Now, to begin with, it's all focused on the other because it's like, well, I don't trust my partner because they have betrayed me. Makes perfect sense. But it doesn't take very long for us to realize that actually we start to question our own judgment. We can no longer trust our judgment because we judged that person as trustworthy. And now they have essentially betrayed it, which means that our judgment was wrong. How can we trust our own judgment? Now, so there's a couple of things to consider here. So first of all, I think when it comes to rebuilding self-trust, there's an analogy I like to use. It's the idea if you imagine yourself as a teacher and stood at the front of a classroom, it's the beginning of the school year, you've got 25 school kids and they're all sort of a bit unruly, they're a bit disorganized, disruptive, they're not really paying attention, they're throwing paper airplanes across the room, they don't do their homework, all that kind of stuff. And the teacher stood there looking a bit overwhelmed to begin with. But as the days and weeks go by, what she does is she starts to help these kids to communicate with each other, help to work together, help to collaborate, how to really understand each other, to ask questions and to be really curious and to try and figure out what it is that the other kid's got going on and what kid they've got going on and how they can sort of like connect and form almost like a unity. And of course, there'll still be times where there'll be one kid that's had a bad day at home and he comes into school and he's a bit disruptive. But because the dynamic of the class has completely changed, we're now in a position where they have his back and the class as a whole can withstand that disruption, if you like, that dysregulation. Now, if we think about ourselves, I'm sure everybody listening can think of a time where a situation had happened and maybe something's happened and you think, well, a part of me thinks or feels this, but there's another part of me that thinks or feels this. Maybe a part of me feels sad and another part of me feels angry. And of course, these two are completely conflicting. They're opposing each other. And you can almost imagine them being like these kids in the classroom, stood at opposite sides of the classroom, not facing each other. They're not communicating. And if they do communicate, it's when they turn and they throw something at each other or shout at each other. Of course, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get these kids to come closer together, to start to communicate, to start to understand. Well, the same is true for the parts of us, the different parts inside our minds. How can we get that part that's angry to turn around and take a look at the part that's sad and get them to come a bit closer together and to start to have a conversation, to start to understand and to start to trust each other? And of course, there's way more than two parts in your mind. There's many different parts. But as we start to do that, it really starts to build that self-trust. Now, we can then take that out into the world. And I'm going to use a slightly different analogy for this one. So now I want to imagine that you are a rock climber or you're a beginner rock climber and you're stood at the face of this cliff and it looks overwhelming, it's scary, it looks dangerous, there's a lot of risk involved. You know that if you slip and fall, there's some significant consequences. But what do? Well, you start by just having a feel around, you put a foot on the first foothold, you apply a bit of pressure, but you've still got the other foot on the ground. And then you lean into it a little bit more and you start climbing. And when you think about rebuilding trust with another person, particularly somebody who's betrayed you, well, you're doing the same thing. You're kind of giving them a little bit. You're testing and prodding and poking in places and seeing how it responds, seeing if it's stable, see if you can move forward. But you're not jumping up the whole cliff face all in one go. You're just taking little steps. The additional thing that you can do, though, is as you start climbing these rocks, you can get the little clips with a rope and you pop them into the crevices of the rock. So as you're going further and further up, these become like your safety net. So even if you do stumble and fall or the rock gives way, the rope has got your back. Now, if we take that into the rebuilding trust with another person, well, the rope is our support network. It's our emotional resilience. It's our ability to deal with difficult emotions and do hard things. And it can be really, it's almost like you get up halfway up the cliff and you look back down, you realize how far you've come, how much you've grown, and actually how much this can really be a catalyst for such profound change. And yeah, just so trust. Trust is so important.
I love it. I love it. The first analogy reminded me of the movie with the different emotions in your head. Have you seen it?
Oh, yeah, the Disney one.
Yep, I can't remember the name, but they have
Elemental.
another.
No,
What
not
was?
Elemental. No, it's
Is
not
it
Elemental.
Inside
That's not
Out?
Inside Out.
Or
Inside Out.
and I think there's another one
Yeah,
coming out this summer. I'm very excited about it. Okay.
amazing.
Amazing. Trust. I think that makes total sense. I love it. We talk about trust inside of the Get Over Your Ex program is 3 different layers. So I like love that you have 2 different. And I'm like because I think there's what I found, I'm sure maybe you've seen this with some of your clients where I have found that individuals who have a trust in like a higher power, whether that's like a religious
Mhm.
background or a spiritual background, it's it's almost like trust comes a little bit easier for them because they have like a blanket of I trust that God or I trust that the universe is, making things make sense or making things like helping me through it. I'm not
Yeah.
alone. Like there's a higher power here. But then, of course, like you can learn how to trust without that as well. You've got that layer of the higher power, then you've got the layer of trust with yourself, and then you've got the layer of trust with others. And I feel like it goes in that direction, like building your strength in each of the higher power and then yourself makes it easier to trust in other people.
Yes.
I
Yes, I
love
agree.
that. Okay, cool. So let's talk about solutions. I'm like a next steps how to girly. If that's not you, it's fine too. But
Yeah.
we would love to know like what is one simple tool or solution that you feel like you could offer the listeners today who might be going through betrayal? Does anything come to mind?
So there's a couple of things. And one, I was asked a question the other day. I was in a group, and the question was, if you were driving down a highway and you had one of those giant billboards on the side of the road, and I'm sure you may have had, and I'm sure this has been doing the rounds, which is probably why I was asked the question. What would you, if you got one billboard, what would you put on that billboard? And the thing I decided at the time was to in massive writing, treat yourself like somebody you really care about. So, as simple as that sounds, it is just about really putting yourself at the top of that pile. It's having compassion for yourself, having understanding for yourself, making time for yourself, really prioritizing yourself. We all know that if you sleep well, you perform better during the day. If you eat well, you become more healthy. If you do more exercise, you become fitter and stronger. It's these really basic foundational things that if you do them first, everything else layered on top of that gets easier. And overcoming betrayal is no different. It's just a challenge that we're trying to overcome. So, really putting yourself first is an absolute priority. Then the other, which is actually something that you and I both learned as we went through our coach training, was to really separate the things that we can control from the things that we cannot. It's so important. I spoke a little bit earlier about that overwhelming, too much information, there's too much going on, and you've got all this narrative, everything's created. So, really, I mean, it's going back to basics. There are other tools we can use, but honestly, the most effective are really simplifying things, getting all of the facts of the situation. What is your current situation? For me at the time, it was I no longer live in the family home. My wife and I are currently going through a divorce. I am not in the stability of my job has changed because of X, Y, Z, and listing all of these absolutely factual things and then putting them to one side. It's like, right, okay, well, that's them. I know they're fixed, they're relatively fixed. Everything else is story. Everything else is just what I'm making it mean, which, again, just compounds on the things that we've already spoken about. And that's where I can really do the work. And it's getting clear on that. And honestly, when we get everybody comes wanting the silver bullet, wanting the perfect 5, 6, 7, however many steps to healing. And of course, there's a million different ways. There is no right way to heal. Honestly, start with the simplest things first, and then everything else builds on top. Don't overcomplicate it.
I love it. Don't overcomplicate it. Make it simple. I'm all for it. Amazing. Okay, is there anything that you would say to someone who's going through something like you did right now? Like knowing what you know now, where
Yep.
you're at now, if you could go back and speak to yourself, like what would you say?
I would say to embrace the discomfort. Don't run away from it. But again, considering the previous thing I said regarding being kind to yourself, recognize what your capacity is for dealing with difficult things, because that will change over time. You'll be able to build that muscle and get stronger and get better. So don't overdo it, but continually push, continually seek growth in that. So what I mean by that is if you are able to withstand a certain situation, for example, like to begin with, maybe you've separated from your partner, but you've still got children and you need to still see that person on a regular basis just by the physical situation, the literal situation, then have boundaries about how much time you spend there, what the routine is. Don't leave yourself in a situation where you're likely to become more emotionally dysregulated because either maybe the conversation's quite good and that starts to create more loving feelings again and you become more attached. Or maybe you've got really deep conflict and you're feeling very angry. So every time you spend more time with that person, you end up shouting and arguing, which of course doesn't help either. So again, just being very really pay attention to how you feel. The work that Dorothy does, as you've just spoken about, is that feeling work. It's understanding really, because that's where it all comes from. That's where all the decisions are made. Everything we do really is because of how we think it's going to make us feel. So, and our feelings are everything from neck down. It's like most of our body is feeling. And then we have this teeny little football on the top of our neck where all the clever, logical, cognitive stuff goes on, but it can't overpower the emotion. So listen to the emotion and just be careful and be kind to yourself. And really, I think with any difficult situation, and it was certainly true for me, and there's not that much I would change about my healing journey. A couple of little details, but generally speaking, I'm, on reflection, I think I dealt with it pretty well. But it's recognizing what a catalyst for change something like this can be. And it doesn't mean you go inviting these situations. Of course not. I don't recommend that you experience betrayal just to have a growth spurt, but you can use this, but you can change your life. You can change your life. And I recommend that you do.
I love that, Luke. Thank you so much.
You're very
One
welcome.
of those like little pieces that you brought up that I think is so powerful is really not putting too many steps ahead of yourself. Like, I feel like you said that as a theme throughout today. So thank you for bringing that up. But you can't future trip your way. It's almost, especially when you're in that betrayal and you're in the emotional dysregulation. I love how you use that word. I just feel like it's so easy to slip into what about all these future problems, though, Dorothy? Like, we're going to have to figure out how to get on board with him, being married to a new person. And how am I supposed to get used to him being at Christmas? Or like all of these things that are so far in the future most of the time. Um, and really just taking it one step at a time. Like, what do I need just to get through today? And like recognizing that that's enough. And I feel like you really said that throughout your entire messaging today. So I just want to say thank you because I think that's so important.
I couldn't agree more.
I
And
love it.
thank you.
All right. So how do people find you? Where are you at? What are you doing? Tell us how they
Yeah,
can get in
sure.
contact with you.
So probably the most effective method of learning more about me is my podcast, the After the Affair podcast, which you can find anywhere. You can learn more about me directly at my website, which is lifecoachluke.com. And then my social media handles are my life coach Luke, which I'm on most of the platforms.
I love it. Amazing. We'll make all of those links available to you today in the show notes as well. So thank you, Bravehearts, for coming in. Thank you, Luke. I really appreciate your time. I know the Bravehearts appreciate your time. So thank you.
And I really appreciate all of you.
If you're loving the How to Get Over Your Ex podcast and you'd like to learn how to fast forward getting over your ex without spending months or years feeling angry, jealous, or unlovable, I would love to personally invite you to participate in our free on-demand video training, where we share 3 mind-blowing moments that will forever change your experience with your breakup or divorce. Come check it out at breakupcoachdorothy.com.